My name is Chloe Cole, and I'm a detransitioner. Another way to put that would be, I used to believe that I was born in the wrong body, and the adults in my life whom I trusted affirmed my belief, and this caused me lifelong, irreversible harm. I speak to you today as a victim of one of the biggest medical scandals in the history of the United States of America.
Do you remember a time when the thinking shifted for you from feeling maybe I'm bisexual to maybe I'm in the wrong body?
I mean, really, it was just based on these feelings that I wasn't feminine enough, or that I didn't fit into the mold. These new terms with which you could describe yourself and explore your identity and explain it to other people, and like all the colorful flags. And it seems so tightly knit. It seems so loving and happy. I mean, it sucked me in.
So were you 15 when you had the surgery?
Yeah, I was 15 years old, and I started to wake up and realize that it wasn't quite the experience that I anticipated it to be. I was incredibly just depressed. It was destroying me, but I couldn't even fathom, like, how could I stop being transgender when I've already gone this far?
Well, Chloe Cole, hello and welcome to the Maybe God podcast. I'm really honored that you're here joining us today. I've seen you on other interviews, obviously, and things that you've written and done. And you're so young, you're 19 years old. Now, for somebody so young like yourself, you've experienced a lot of highs and lows, and you've been kind of foisted into the center of this heated controversy over gender ideology and all of that. Yes. But before we get to that, I'd like to just start from the beginning and get to know you. All right, Chloe. So maybe just tell us a little bit about your childhood and what it was like growing up.
Yeah, I mean, I had a pretty healthy family situation at home. I've got a pretty decently sized family. I'm the youngest of five. I've got two sisters and two brothers, one on each side. And being the baby was kind of difficult at times, especially because there's kind of a significant difference in age between me and the rest of my siblings.
Okay.
And they moved out pretty soon. Like, by the time I was like 10 years old, by the time I was in like 5th or 6th grade, everybody had already moved out. So there were times when it felt like I was the only kid. And when they were home, I didn't always relate to everybody, and they didn't always relate to me, and they didn't always want me around because I was in elementary school and they already were like finishing up high school. And that was something that was hard for me.
Yeah.
Especially because at like outside of the family at school, I didn't really have like a whole lot of friends at school either.
So you were kind of, they call the kids like that loners, but I hate to use that word because it feels a little derogatory or whatever. But
I mean, loner kind of gives the idea that it was by choice. But the thing was, I wanted to have friends. And I had like a few friends throughout like my years of going through public school.
Yeah.
But I found it difficult, especially as I was the younger that I was, to get along with the kids my age, especially with other girls. I felt like we just weren't really interested in the same things, and that I always felt like I was different. I'd always been more artistically minded. I have always kind of been a little bit eccentric and just thought differently from the people around me.
Yeah.
And I was a target for bullying when I was younger. And I didn't really feel like I had anywhere, a whole lot of places in the world to really call home, where I could feel like I could have an established identity.
Sure. I think everybody listening and watching right now probably knows or knew a kid like you, or maybe they were a kid like you, and you just don't fit into either sort of gender stereotype completely growing up, and you're called a tomboy, or, you know, I'm sure there's other similar phrases for boys that have more effeminate interests.
Yeah, and those are pretty normal feelings growing up. Nothing was really out of the ordinary. I mean, other than the fact that, I mean, I'm very likely on the spectrum. I haven't had an official diagnosis because my doctors growing up kind of dropped the ball on that. And by the time that they even considered that I was on the spectrum, I was too old I was too old, and it was too late for me to really have any resources for that.
Yeah. Did you and your family practice any sort of religion when you were young?
Well, my mother was raised Catholic and my dad Mormon. And they took me to church up until I was roughly about like 4 or 5 years old. But religion and faith wasn't really like a big focus while I was growing up. I wasn't really raised with any Christian ideals, and my mom and dad stopped taking me when I was fairly young. So it wasn't something that I had really thought about a whole lot. And my dad and my mom have told me that they didn't want to feel like they were really forcing any set of beliefs on me. They wanted me to be able to develop a worldview independently, to develop my own views about the world. But I feel like in a way, because of that, I lacked stability in terms of my beliefs and convictions and in building my identity growing up. So I feel like that was like a major part of my identity struggle. I didn't really understand why things were the way that they were, why I was made this way, why I was born a girl instead of a boy, or the world around me, or how to conduct myself. And I feel like my transition became a way for me to do that.
Yeah. I think it's pretty normal for these days for parents to take that sort of tack with their kids and just, I don't want to impose any old religion or tradition on my kid. I want my kid to figure it out for themselves. And that seems to be the most virtuous way in the eyes of this world to raise kids. And while I understand it, as you've clearly, eloquently stated here, there's a downside to that for sure, because it opens kids up to being indoctrinated elsewhere. And so I appreciate you sharing that. I hadn't heard you speak much about the religious element of your upbringing. And so I'm curious about how that sort of played into the whole story that we're about to get into. You've talked about feeling rejected early in life, and everybody can relate to that, but your rejection seems to have been more wholesale and deeply felt. And were girls, let me say it like this, did you feel acceptable and beautiful as a girl when you were really young? Do you remember feeling pretty?
There were times when I did, and there were other times when I really scrutinized every part of myself. And a big part of it was that I started to go through puberty fairly early, which today is actually pretty standard. Girls are starting to go through puberty younger and younger.
Around what age, if
personally,
I could be?
like my breasts started to develop when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And it was tough having that kind of attention on me. And in the environment that I was growing up in, I had like a lot of my peers were very precocious. They were talking about things that at the age that we really should not have known anything about. Things like sex, women's bodies, the things that they would see.
Things they would see where were they getting?
Their phones, where whatever devices their parents were letting them use, just completely unrestricted.
Right.
And I also had unrestricted internet access from a pretty young age as well. So I had a lot of exposure to a lot of ideas that were just too adult. It was just too early.
Sure.
And I felt like a lot of my worth as a woman was going to come from my looks, from my body and my sexuality. And if I didn't have much to provide in terms of that, I didn't know where my identity as a woman would really come from.
Sure. I can see how that could happen. And do you directly attribute that to access to the internet and social media before you were ready?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I got my first personal computer, I think, at 9 or 10 years old. And then eventually I had, at roughly the same age, just started like handing out laptops at school to the entire school district. Students as young as 5th grade could take them home and just do whatever on them. And then I got my
blockers
first
or anything?
smartphone. Oh no, they started off with like no blockers at all for any websites.
Seems like just a poorly devised plan.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of kids got in trouble for like like viewing pornography on their devices.
Yeah.
And then I got my first phone right before my 12th birthday. And I think that was really that was even more destructive because, I mean, a laptop wouldn't always, it doesn't have access to a cellular network. So you can't just access the internet from
Right.
everywhere.
Sure.
But now, like,
Anytime, anywhere.
all of that, I could access it just from my pocket.
Right.
And now I was using social media apps that everybody else my age was using.
Like which ones?
It was Instagram and Snapchat were some of the main ones.
Sure.
But Instagram was kind of like my platform of choice, just because like it's very, very image oriented, very, very easy to use, very easy to connect with people on there. And I had like a lot of people that I knew from school on there.
Yeah.
So I wanted to see what was up. Because a lot of my friends were like, they got their first phones, some of them as early as like first or second grade.
Way early.
And I wanted to see like what they were doing on there. I wanted to see what they were up to because these are my peers, and I already feel kind of disconnected from them. So I wanted to see if this is another way to get to them, and also it was a way to explore communities around some of my own personal interests outside of school and people that I knew from school. And I browsed a lot of those communities that were mainly around like video games, illustration, artwork, anime, shows that I watched.
Yeah.
And that's actually how I got sucked in to the transgender community. It was through those communities because a lot of the people within those communities were young men and women and girls and boys who identified with the LGBT. Many of them they called themselves like gay or bisexual or lesbian. And a lot of them were kids my age who called themselves transgender and
Yeah.
overwhelmingly female.
Right.
And it was just, I think the overlap between those two things is that a lot of people who identify with LGBT in my generation are very artistic. Many of them are a little bit more on the nerdy side. Many of them are very socially awkward. They have like specialized interests.
Kind of
And
eccentric.
they struggle to find a community like at school or in person. So as many of them do, they turn to the internet. And that was what I did.
Yeah.
And it was something that intrigued me quite a bit.
Sure.
With all of these novel concepts to me, these new terms with which you could describe yourself and explore your identity and explain it to the people, to other people, and like all of the colorful flags and the way that they talked about this, like it was like a journey of self-discovery and finding like your own niche, a community and it seems so tightly knit. It seemed so loving and happy, and these people were funny and relatable, and I mean it sucked me in.
Yeah.
Like it was just so cool to me. I had never really related to a group of people so much in my entire life up until that point.
And these were people living all over the world, people whose faces you might not even have seen. But it was
and mainly mainly in the West, mainly in the US and the UK.
Yeah. And it was a community. You keep saying that word, and that is no small word to a young person who has felt rejected and isolated.
No, in community, I mean, it really is like just it's kind of like an umbrella of a bunch of like little different communities with like their own like niches.
Yeah.
But they're all pretty similar, and it's all around like the same idea of identity and sexuality.
Right. And being outside the heteronormative sort of homogeny of that and finding solidarity in that.
Yeah. And
Totally.
I mean, at first, like I thought like I was just like bisexual or something because like, I mean, I consider myself to pretty much be straight because I've always just been more focused on having an interest in men. And I think I I want to get married to a man one day and I want to have a family, and I can't do that without being in a heterosexual relationship.
Yeah.
But there were times growing up when I had crushes on like female celebrities or like girls in my classes or girls that I was friends with.
Right.
So at first I thought, well, maybe I feel like I relate because like I'm bisexual. Maybe I'm going to experiment with these different labels like pansexual or
Sure.
I don't know. Like I don't know what it means to feel like a woman. I don't really relate to the girls around me. I don't feel like I'm 100% feminine, so I don't feel like I even think like a girl.
Yeah.
You know, maybe I'm non-binary. Maybe I'm genderless. And eventually it became, well, there's just, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, does being a girl feel right? Was I even supposed to be one? Because I don't exactly feel happy about the way that I was made.
Yeah.
Or the changes that I'm seeing as I'm going through puberty. It's something that makes me uncomfortable.
Sure.
And I don't know if I want that kind of attention. I don't know if I even want that for myself.
Right.
Maybe all along I was supposed to be a boy. And these were thoughts that I was having independently of interacting with people within this community, because I wasn't really talking to anybody in these circles. It was just like the sheer influence, all these new ideas coming to me,
Sure.
and kind of being in isolation that started to get me questioning all this.
I've heard you describe your experience early on social media, and I think it was also in gaming sort of platforms and different kinds of access points to that community. I've heard you describe it as a grooming experience, like it was a feeling of being groomed, but it sounds like it wasn't like a situation where you were actively groomed by individuals, like who would pull you aside in some dark corner and, that sort of creepy grooming. It was more of a cultural grooming process that happened by being sort of inundated with these messages and themes.
Yes, and it was definitely more of like a cultural and ideological kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, but it was real, and it gave you a real sense of community and belonging that everyone knows what it feels like to hunger for that exactly, and
it gave me a convenient explanation for why I was different.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, especially like people who are neurodivergent, people who are on the autistic spectrum, or even those who have ADHD, tend to be very oriented towards finding answers for everything. They want to explore and understand the world around them.
Sure. Yeah. And so do you remember a time when the thinking shifted for you from feeling maybe I'm bisexual to maybe I'm in the wrong body?
Yeah, it was actually a very quick matter of time, a matter of months even.
Yeah. And what was it that led you to that conclusion that you perhaps might just need to reassess your, embodiment?
I mean, really, it was just based on these feelings that I wasn't feminine enough, or that I didn't fit into the mold of what a girl was supposed to be. I felt like, even like in terms of my appearance, like I liked having my hair short. My features were a little boyish. I had some muscle in my body, and like my shoulders were like have always been like the main focal point of my body. They've always been wider than like, say, like my bust or my hips. And I felt like that was something that was a big insecurity for me growing up, actually.
Interesting.
I thought that I grew up in an age where the ideal body type is like the hyper curvy hourglass pear shape,
right?
Bottom heavy, thick. And I thought that was something that I fixated on quite a bit, because I just felt like if I wasn't like that,
yeah,
if I didn't have curves, if I was too skinny or too muscular, then I just wouldn't be good or pretty enough as a woman.
I appreciate that added insight, honestly. The specificity with which you just described that helps people who haven't been in that position exactly. And we hear stories like young girls, young women saying, I just felt like I didn't measure up, or I wasn't the right kind of woman. And a lot of us, especially guys, I think probably just don't know what that means. But But the added detail there really helps me to understand exactly how you're looking in a mirror on the one hand, and you're looking at your phone in the other, and it's just, you see specific things that aren't right in your mind, or that
Yes.
aren't as they should be.
And we live in a world that now is it's very image oriented. Plastic surgery is something that's become really common in my
Yeah.
generation. Even like getting nose job or getting fillers like in your cheeks and in your lips, getting Botox for your jawline or like around like your neck
Yeah.
to like reduce the muscle mass there.
Sure.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So at what point do you remember first sort of identifying outwardly as a male rather than a female?
It was a very slow process for me, actually. I wanted to just kind of gradually get used to it, starting online by changing my display name, asking people to call me a boy.
What was
and
the
then
name you
slowly
chose, just out of curiosity?
I went through a few different names. I think the first few ones I chose were like, I don't know, like Caleb, Kai.
Sure.
And then I eventually settled with Leo because it was like, it's convenient. Like it's 3 letters out of my real name.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And I didn't want to get too far from the source material. I wanted to be faithful to what my mom and dad gave me just a little bit.
Yeah. Interesting.
But eventually, like I started slowly cutting my hair shorter and shorter and swapping out the clothing in my bedroom, my closet, with more clothing from like the boys and men's department.
Right.
I found it kind of difficult to adjust to because men's and women's clothing sizes are quite different.
Yes.
And there's not like a whole lot of men's clothes that come in the size of a 5'4" female, you know? So
5'4" post-pubescent female. Yeah, it's hard to find.
yeah, I was 12 at the time. Eventually, I started telling a very select few people at school about it.
Okay.
And a lot of them actually were like, what do you mean you're a boy? Like,
Yeah.
like these are people who had known me since elementary school, right? I wasn't fooling anybody. They didn't think I was a boy. And a lot of them actually took like a very negative reaction to it, which I feel kind of propelled me further into my transition because it's like, a lot of them were like, they were being jerks about it just because like I was presenting myself differently, I was really just trying to
Express yourself.
discover myself.
Sure.
It could have been something that was benign, but it felt like,
I wonder, had they treated it like no big deal, if you would have just been like, oh, well, I guess that's not as
I think
impactful.
so. I think eventually like it would have been, does this really even matter? Like, do I have to call myself this? Do I have to do all this stuff? But because like they were so on me about it, it was like, I'm going to prove them wrong.
Sure.
Like I really believe that I am a boy, and they are going to understand that one day. I'm going to look and sound just like a boy, and that's
Yeah.
how they're going to know me.
Yeah.
And this kind of put some tension on me about telling my family about it,
Sure.
because if my schoolmates were reacting like that, how are mom and dad and my older siblings and extended family gonna react to this? Like I knew they would all still love me, right? But like if I was being made fun of at school for this, I just couldn't anticipate the reaction that I
Sure.
was going to get. Which, to my surprise at the time, my mom and dad, when they read the letter that I wrote to them, they were very supportive.
Really?
And they didn't want to push back a whole lot. They didn't want me to go through the medical process, of course. But they wanted to show their support for me and help me feel comfortable during this time. Although they kind of suspected that it might have to do with some of my mental health and my social issues at the time with trying to fit in and not really feeling like I had like somewhere to belong.
Yeah.
And this was something that was completely new to them. Like they knew absolutely nothing about this.
What year was
And
this? This wouldn't have been that long ago, but
About 2017.
2017. And so I mean, that feels like yesterday in some ways, but so much has happened on this front
Oh,
culturally and
yeah.
socially.
Yeah, there
but-
wasn't, it was very different back then.
Yeah.
There weren't any whistleblowers on this. There was nobody like me really out there talking about transition regret
Right.
or coming back from transitioning. My dad once told me that if he knew that there was another kid like me out there who had been through this and stopped and regretted it, he and mom never would have let me go through this.
Interesting. I know
But
I'm sorry, you've also talked, I hate to bring this up, because this has got to be the most exhausting part of your story to tell over and over again, but you've spoken and written about a horrific thing that happened to you in the 8th grade, and I'm just wondering at what point that became a factor in this whole story.
Yeah, so the incident that you're talking about actually was something that happened while I was already transitioning. So after I had already started medically transitioning, and I will address that later as I get into that.
Sure, please.
But my mom and dad, they started like looking online for resources on this, like how to deal with this. They knew like it was a mental health issue for me and that I needed maybe more resources than they could provide for me at the time.
Where were they going for these resources? What kind of resources?
I'm not entirely sure. I think they were just researching at the time.
Sure.
And eventually they found something that recommended our healthcare provider at the time as the top choice in the state of California.
Wow.
In our entire state for care for youth who experience gender dysphoria or identify as transgender. And to them, they thought that care would just mean like, oh, she's going to get mental health resources. They're gonna help her through this time. They're gonna encourage her to explore herself within boundaries, right? Like I'm not going to be allowed to make any decisions governing my body, but I will be taught how to cope with these feelings in the meanwhile.
Okay.
And that was not what happened at all. When they started sending me to therapy, they were not allowed to partake in these sessions with me.
Your parents?
So they did not, no, yeah, they were not allowed in the room with me.
Wow.
And they were never followed up with about what was discussed during these appointments. They didn't know what was going on with me. And I was having like some issues at home. I was having some issues socially at school. I was in 8th grade. All my friends were in older grades and had already graduated and gone off to high school. And I was all alone with this new identity that I was trying to carve out for myself. And that was difficult. People weren't always the nicest to me. And some people were even targeting me as bullies. And I would talk about these issues with the first therapist I had, I think, who eventually got kicked out of the system after like a month. I don't know if that's for certain, but I remember him being pretty lousy because I would talk about all this and he'd just be like, "Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that." Like, okay, I'm in therapy. I'm supposed to be learning how to deal with this, right? I'm supposed to be getting better, and I'm not. Nothing is happening.
Is he just disinterested, or was he
of course,
trying to steer you in some specific direction?
I don't know. Like he would like call me by my preferred name and pronouns and such, but nothing of value was being done. So I started becoming more stressed about what was going on, and eventually that led to me becoming more distressed about my identity,
Sure.
about my body image issues. And eventually I had a second therapist, and she was the one who really started to get things rolling. And there were a few appointments that I think my mom and dad, or just my mom actually, was having with her, where she was told, like, I mean, she started to push back, like, I'm worried about why she wants to do this so bad and so young. Like, I don't think now is the time for her to be doing this kind of thing. She's a kid. She's still growing.
Yeah.
She's still got some time to develop and decide whether this is something that she wants. And the pushback was immediate. This psychologist told her, no, now is the time, because that's what she wants. And what she wants is what she needs, because she knows at this age exactly what she needs. Because gender identity is something that is innate, something that children understand from a very young age. And you have to understand this is a part of her identity. And if you don't affirm her and her identity and her decision to do this, she brought up the suicide statistics to my mom and basically used it to tell her, like, if you don't allow her to do this, it could be life or death for her.
Yeah.
Basically, it was
You could have
emotional manipulation.
and a live son or a dead daughter or something along those lines. I've heard that. Yeah, it's so abusive.
That's the ultimatum that they give these parents.
Yeah.
It's abusive in every single way.
There's no way your mom was prepared to refute that. I mean, there's no normal person would be, like, under the circumstances, especially in 2017 before this really blew up.
Yeah. I mean, when you're a parent and you hear that your child can die,
Yeah.
what else do you do but follow the advice of your doctors, of the people who you're supposed to trust with caring for your child?
Sure. What was the proposed treatment plan initially?
Basically following whatever I wanted.
Okay.
They're letting my judgment as a preteen
Yeah.
develop the course of my treatment. So we started with a referral to an endocrinologist for Lupron to stop my puberty, right?
Okay.
The first one actually said no. He was hesitant to put me on these treatments until I was 14, which would be about a year's difference, hardly anything, right? But
Lupron is the
He
drug
didn't really-
that is also used for chemical castration. Is that what I remember?
yeah, yes.
It's pretty serious business.
We didn't know this at the time. This is
Yeah.
something that we were informed of, actually. But eventually we were just referred very quickly to another endocrinologist who said yes. I think, like, the amount of time between, like, first seeing a therapist and then actually being administered my first shot of Lupron was probably about, like, half a year. So it was very expedited. It was very quick. And after my first shot, was when I signed the waivers for testosterone. And I was on the Lupron for, I think, like, about, like, a month to maybe 2 or 3 months. So during this time, my body was basically in a stasis. Except not really, because it was an early menopause, essentially. I was about 3, 4, maybe 5 years into puberty by this point in time.
Yeah.
So by stopping the production of all the sex hormones in my body and the function of my ovaries, I was starting to experience menopausal symptoms.
Wow.
Like hot flashes, these other, like, weird sensations, like itching, tingling in my limbs and all
Sure.
over my body. I became very lethargic.
Irritable, maybe.
Yeah, it's nothing that a 13-year-old girl should be going through.
Right.
So when I started on the testosterone eventually, it was like, I was incredible, because I was led to believe that was something that was, like, an integral part of my body that would lead me closer to my real identity as a boy,
Sure.
as a man. So there was the excitement of that and looking forward to the effects of it. And then there was, like, the immediate psychological effects that were, in a way, sort of stimulant-like, because I finally had my energy back. It was a huge boost in my energy,
Sure.
in my mood in general. I started becoming, like, very confident, even, like, a little bit competitive. And I had, like, a super huge boost in my sex drive. I mean, it was just crazy being on that.
Yeah.
And eventually, like, I started going through some of the physical changes after like only about a few weeks.
What were
My
those
voice
like?
started to drop.
Okay.
My voice started to drop pretty quickly, pretty deep. It was like deeper than like a lot of the men around me, a lot of the like actual teenage boys that I was friends with for the longest time.
Yeah.
And it's a miracle that my voice is as high as it is now.
Yeah, you wouldn't
That wasn't
know.
supposed to happen.
Huh.
But it kind of sucked because I had been singing from a very young age, and eventually, like, it diminished my abilities a little bit.
Sure.
It's changed up my range, and right now I'm trying to retrain it, and I hope that I'll have my abilities back, and I'll be better.
Yeah.
But
What other physical changes did you notice?
yeah, I started to like I was still growing, so I started having changes to my bone structure as well. Like those are permanent. Like my shoulders are quite a bit wider, so is the rest of my upper body. I do have a bit of an Adam's apple still, actually. My nose, my brow bone, my jawbone, my cheekbones are more prominent, and my hips are not super developed. And I started to develop quite a bit of muscle while I was on it, which is like a huge confidence booster, right?
Sure.
Because I had body image issues. I wanted to be able to change my body, and to be able to see those changes so soon, it felt like I had power. I
Right.
had control over myself.
Yeah.
And my hair everywhere just started getting thicker. On my head, my eyebrows, my eyelashes started developing like facial hair, like more hair on my arms and legs and such.
And this was after how long?
And-
Like how many months were you on these hormones?
I mean, these are like gradual changes, but they started coming like very, very soon afterwards, actually. Like just within like the next like 2 to 3 months is when I really started to notice like any physical changes in like the overall like structure and shape of my body. And
Yeah.
I mean, I was still in 8th grade by this point in time. I was still surrounded by people who had known me from a very early age. So like nobody was, even like as I was starting to look more like a boy my age, they still all saw me as a girl. But I didn't really have like any like formal coming out or anything like that to most of my peers. So it was like, what's going on here? Like it's like she is reversing course and starting to go through like a male puberty. So that must have been like a very jarring thing for my classmates to watch.
How was that for you? Was it, sometimes kids, welcome attention, and sometimes attention is unwanted and dreaded. How was it for you?
I mean, it was kind of entertaining, but it was also a little bit scary because I didn't know what people were going to like say about it to me. And most of like the girls were pretty nice to me, but there was one particular boy throughout the school here who had always been kind of mean about it. Like he was noticing like me trying to hang out more with the boys. And so he would kind of pick on me. Sometimes like he would get like really like weirdly like touchy feely. He would grab my arms and stuff and be like, "Wow, you've got a lot of muscle." Or he'd really focus in on the fact that I was a girl. Like call it like half of his insults. He was probably like talking about the fact that I was a girl and really emphasizing that.
Yeah.
Sometimes like he would like talk about me like right behind my back, like while he was still in earshot.
Mm-hmm.
He would like spit on me. Sometimes he would like trip me in class.
Wow.
And eventually one day the bullying became something more than that, much worse than that. It was no longer bullying. It became an assault. And he walked up to me one day, a little bit later in the school year, and he had this just threatening, dead look on his face. And he came up to me, and he squeezed one of my breasts. And in that moment, I was just frozen in fear. I didn't know how to respond to this. So I didn't know what to do. And he He walked away. I looked around me. Nobody said anything. Nobody came up to me asking me if I was okay, if I felt safe. Nobody went up to him, like, asking, like, why would you do that?
Sure.
What is wrong with you? It felt like I was just so small and so insignificant. Like, it didn't matter how hurt I felt in that moment, because nobody was going to care. Nobody was going to help me. I was already in the mentality of trying to become a boy, so it was like, well, if nobody's going to save me, I think I'm just going to have to toughen up. I got to be a man about it. And
Wow.
I mean, it was embarrassing, like, just even thinking about telling somebody about that, because if I want to be a boy, how can I talk about having had this very female part of my body assaulted? How could I bring that up to anybody?
Yeah.
Am I even going to be taken seriously? For years, I never told anybody about what happened. I didn't know how to. And I repressed that memory in my mind because it was so painful.
Yeah.
But that fear of being taken advantage of as a woman, of somebody putting their hands on me like that, of even being recognized, of somebody even knowing that I was a girl, was there for a very long time. And very soon afterward was when I decided I'm going to start hiding my breasts now. Because I didn't care before, because I knew that everybody around me knew that I was a girl. But I didn't know that that was going to put me in danger.
Yeah.
And I can't let anybody know. Nobody can know about this.
Yeah. So that involved binding or something to hide that part of your body, and everything you're saying, again, it should not be that difficult for us to at least have compassion and empathize with your situation in that point in time as a child, feeling defenseless and alone, and your feeling there is that the best way to defend yourself is as a male, as you know, who you quote unquote really are, and once you do that, you'll be less unsafe, let's say. And so
Yes.
that drove you further into this world of medical transition. At what point did the conversation shift from just the hormones and things to something like surgery?
Yeah, that wasn't until I was in my second year of high school, when I was a sophomore. And once I went to high school, that was when, I think like a week before my freshman year was when my mom and dad and I went in, and we had like my name and sex markers changed in the school files. And by this point in time, like, I was on hormones for a while. I just looked like a rather short 14-year-old boy. And I mean, nobody knew. I started socializing as a boy. I started making friends with groups of boys and just being as one of them.
Sure.
It was kind of like a little crash course on the socialization of teenage boys. So it was a learning experience.
I bet.
I started, yeah, it was interesting, and it was fun. And I still look back fondly on some of the times that I had in those friends groups,
Yeah.
being seen as one of them.
Were you Leo
I was
to them?
using, yes, I was Leo to them. Many of them didn't even know that I was a girl. There were a few instances when I was like outed behind my back to people at school, which could have been pretty bad. That was something that I was very wary of, actually, because I was using like the male restroom and locker room facilities to use to change and such in. Like, it's kind of ironic that my fear of being assaulted or being seen as a girl pushed me further into my transition, because I was even subconsciously aware that I was potentially putting myself into further danger, because I knew that, like, if somebody malicious knew that I was female,
Sure.
and they like caught me alone in one of those facilities, it could have been dangerous.
Yeah.
I could have gotten hurt.
Absolutely.
But nobody really knew, and nobody, even the people who did know, didn't really care for the most part. But eventually, like, the excitement started to wear off. It started to get kind of weird, because, like, I actually experienced, this might come as a surprise, but I actually experienced more sexual harassment when people perceived me as a boy. Because now it wasn't just like, now there wasn't like really like a sort of power dynamic there anymore. I wasn't like, now like a lot of girls had crushes on me. Like I wasn't like a bad looking kid by any means.
Yeah.
And they were mistaken that I was the boy, you know. But some of them would like get really like touchy feely, like
Sure.
like stroking my arm, like trying to like, some of them even like try to like make me kiss them and stuff.
Huh.
And like there were like a few times when like I was like being stalked or like people taking pictures of me. It was really
Really?
bizarre.
Yeah.
And sometimes like even there were instances of like even like guys doing weird stuff. But now it was like I wasn't afraid anymore because it's like we're just two dudes. Like what are they gonna do?
Right. Sure.
But it started to that was one of the things that made me realize like people just don't really care a whole lot about young men in general. I think they don't care about their feelings. They don't care about their safety really.
Yeah.
You're just expected to be tough.
Sure.
You can't really be very intimate in a lot of your relationships. And I became lonely. I didn't feel like I was as I didn't feel like I was as close to people as I could have been.
Huh.
And like especially with my girlfriends, like it would be weird like if we were like always hanging out and like always like super close to each other, people would like start assuming things.
Yeah.
And I started to wake up and realize that it wasn't quite the experience that I anticipated it to be. And the testosterone made my emotions very difficult for me to deal with. It was a real
Really?
battle at times because it made my negative emotions a whole lot more difficult to really just process even.
Sure.
Crying was a whole lot more difficult. And like I could like now I could like do it for hours on end and nothing I wouldn't get any release from it. It would feel like I would feel worse after the fact.
Huh.
And because like I didn't really have like any like meaningful or healthy outlet for my feelings.
Yeah.
It would come out in some pretty unhealthy ways at times. Like I would have outbursts. I was prone to getting angry, and it was something that started to affect my relationships.
Yeah.
I started feeling like the sexual aspect of it, my sex drive became really difficult for me to deal with, especially like as my dose was being raised. It was just incredibly uncomfortable because when I started on the testosterone, it's not natural that sudden spike. It's like boys going through puberty. It's like a gradual increase in their sex drive
Sure.
and their hormone levels. For me, it was just one day, all of a sudden, like, it was there.
Yeah.
And I wasn't actually a boy. I wasn't raised as a boy. So I didn't really have like any male guidance on how to deal with the feelings that come with going through like a male puberty.
Yeah.
I mean, how could I bring that up to any adult? Why would I want to talk
Where does that
to an adult
conversation begin?
about
Yeah.
sex? And of course, like all my doctors are female.
Uh-huh.
So they didn't know what it was like. They couldn't really guide me on that either.
Yeah.
And the combination of the loneliness, the distress, and the steroids
Yeah.
led to some pretty dark places for me. After a while, once the transition was just my new normal and the affirmation that comes with it went away, I started to seek a new source of validation. I was easy prey for some bad actors on the internet, and there were a few times when actually I had been groomed by adult men. Some within the transgender community, some within like the broader LGBT, and some outside of it.
For their sexual ends.
Yes. And I knew that I understood that these people didn't actually love me, but I didn't think that I was a person who was deserving of love
Yeah.
because I was so lonely. I thought that was just how I was supposed to be. But I still sought it out because it was something that gave me at least some sort of purpose to somebody in that way.
Validation, attention, all of it. I mean, even negative, attention can be better than no attention or no validation at all.
Yeah.
It can feel that way.
I mean, all of this was it was destroying me. It was killing me on the inside. Eventually, I started experimenting with substances. My grades started to fail, and I was like failing out of my classes. It was really destroying me in every single part of my life. Eventually, I was called to the office at school one day, and they were reporting me home because I was experiencing suicidal ideation. And this is after years of not seeing a therapist, because after I started the testosterone, like, I seemed so happy, and I thought that I was happy because of the excitement of starting my transition. And eventually that went away, and the honeymoon period went away, and I was incredibly just depressed.
Yeah.
For the first time in my life, like, I was severely suicidal.
Really?
And yeah, there were weeks when waking up, when doing anything, was just a battle. I started like skipping my classes. Sometimes I wouldn't even like get out of bed. Sometimes I would like manically text my mom in the middle of the night because I didn't know what to do.
How were your parents through all of this? I mean, were they consistently supportive?
Yeah, because they didn't think that there was any other option. They kept being told by my doctors that, oh, like, if you don't allow her to do this, she'd become incredibly suicidal. Even though this was making me not want to live. I never once was suicidal until I had been on these interventions, until I was going through this course.
Yeah. That had to be
and
so ironic.
And my mom and dad, they
them.
were sensible. They didn't want me to go through this, but they felt like their hand was forced, like they were coerced, and I feel like they were. I feel like even though they, of course, they were legally required to sign off on these treatments, but that doesn't mean it was consent.
Sure.
It wasn't. It wasn't informed, and they were being manipulated by my doctors.
Yeah.
They were being convinced that without it, I was going to die.
And as you said, the more you got into this world, the more suicidal you became. And I can't imagine the distress for all of you, but in particular as a parent, I can't imagine the distress for your parents, the deeper you got into this. But I can imagine like you're in it now, and so there's no going back, right? At that point, your mindset must have been something like, I've come this far, and now there's still a few more steps to go, and that's a better alternative than, walking it back.
Yeah, I didn't really have any feelings of regret until after I had my surgery. And I was psychotic. I was not thinking within the realm of reality. I genuinely thought that I was supposed to be a boy. That somehow I was really a man, and that there was no other choice for me. And even like as I was becoming cognizant of my issues in my day-to-day, I just couldn't attribute it in my head to my transition, because I really thought that was me.
Yeah.
And I started becoming more distressed about my body, particularly about my breast, because I was sick of binding every day. I was sick of wearing this tight thing that would like sometimes like poke out from like my shirt collar, and it was like hot and sweaty.
Sure.
And like, I would like work out, go swimming in this thing, wear it basically whenever I went out, and I would wear it every single day. My school days were about like 8 hours, so I'd be wearing this thing for well over like 8 hours per day.
Yeah.
It sucked.
Brutal.
I hated it. I wanted to be free of it, and I wanted I had like this fantasy in my head of just having a chest like a guy and being able to like take off my shirt in the locker room, or even just like go out like to a beach.
Yeah.
Without my shirt on.
Sure.
And just be free and that was my idea of freedom, not having breasts, being able to expose my bare chest to the sun.
Right. I get it.
And I started considering surgery and talking about that with my doctors. I recently looked back over my records and talked to my mom and dad about some of this. And apparently the process for being referred to surgery was actually very quick. They said that it was probably, they'd seen like this psychiatrist called a gender specialist. I think that basically means just like a psychologist like trained specifically to deal with gender dysphoria and refer people between different services for that. And they saw her for like maybe like a good like 20-ish minutes before they got the letter of referral to my surgeon.
20
And
minutes.
even roughly about there, yeah. It just took like one appointment. They saw this woman for one appointment, and then I was off to the surgeon.
Wow. That's shocking, Chloe, honestly.
This is a doctor who I'd never had before, who knew absolutely nothing about me. It was just like, oh, you've been on testosterone for this amount of time, and you've been identifying as trans for whatever. Yeah, go on. You're cleared. You're clear for surgery.
Wow.
Even though I was in, at that time, just a horrific mental state.
Sure. And when you got to the surgeon, I mean, the surgeon's probably not going to tap the brakes because that surgeon has gotten the okay from the mental health people. And
Yeah.
yeah. And so it's just, all right, here we go. I mean,
It's funny that you say that because that's exactly what he said to me when I reported my regrets and some of the complications to him after my surgery.
really?
It was like, oh, well, you know, I think it's okay because they gave me the letter of referral.
Right.
They assessed you, so
Pass the buck.
it's fine because that was their decision, not mine.
Yeah.
You know,
Just wash
operating
my
on
hands of
perfectly
this.
healthy 15-year-old girls. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything the neck up is not my responsibility. It's just, you know, I they take care of the mind and I take care of the body. But man, that's a dangerous precedent we're setting, where there's so much financial incentive for these medical health professionals to do this and pass the buck and pass kids along one to the other until, you know, you make these life-altering decisions.
Yeah, they say like, oh, well, we use like multidisciplinary teams for children before children can undergo these procedures. But it's like, it really is just a straight pipeline.
Yeah. So were you
One
15
direction.
when you had the surgery?
Yeah, I was 15 years old, and it was the summer right after my sophomore year of high school. So I was just a little baby, really. It was a very interesting time in my life because this was like mid 2020, so like mid pandemic. All the measures for like quarantines and
Right.
and such were still in place and still still going pretty strong, and yet I was still allowed to go through surgery
Yeah.
at that point in time. It's kind of interesting because like a lot of like elective procedures,
Right.
even things that could potentially be like a huge improvement to certain patients like well-being
Sure.
and life quality.
Yeah.
They weren't allowed to go through those because they were considered elective. And yet like the removal of my perfectly healthy breasts was something that was allowed to happen
Dude.
during this time when a lot of patients were being denied actual care.
Like cancer screenings were being denied. I mean, and this was okayed. It's wild. It's absolutely wild. Yeah.
And yeah, it was a pretty rough year after that. And there was like the first few months I was like basically disabled because like it was a major surgery in the upper half of my body.
Sure.
Where there's a lot of connective tissue there. So I couldn't lift up my arms till above my head till like the 2-3 month mark. And I had to have like my mom stay at home with me, like take like a few weeks off of work to help me around the house. And it was, on one hand, like I was like the moment I woke up from surgery, it was like I was exhilarated, like wow, like I'm finally at the last step of this. I
Yeah.
can finally just be myself, and once I'm all healed up, I'll look just like all the other boys, and nobody's gonna know.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to know. This is my new me.
Sure.
This is what I was always supposed to be. And I was looking forward to being able to fully heal.
Yeah.
And I never really did.
Why?
I started having complications after I stopped transitioning, actually. But before I get into that, just those first few weeks were really rough. Like once I got stitches taken out, which that was just a very strange experience because like with like the removal of tissue and like rearranging like all the skin and such, like my nerve endings were not all the way there yet.
Yeah.
So it was weird, just like it made me sick, like looking down at my body as they were taking out the stitches and not being able to feel it, or like just like the altered sensation of it barely being there. It like there were a few times during that procedure when like I almost like threw up, or I had to like sit up or like drink some juice because it
Unsettling.
was just so alien.
Yeah.
And I had to do like aftercare, not only with the scars, but I had the type of surgery that I got was called a double mastectomy with nipple grafts, meaning that they basically like excised the areolas, the skin around them, and put them into like a higher position on my chest to basically simulate a more masculine appearance of the chest.
Right.
And I won't get into severe detail here, but just looking at that part of my body every night, like before every bath, before every shower, and having to like dress the wounds and take care of them, it's like I walked straight out of a battlefield. It was hard for me to look at.
The scarring and just
And I felt like I felt like a Frankenstein's monster.
Really?
Just looking at it. I thought like there are times when I thought like, oh my gosh, like if I look like this, I mean, how am I like gonna get into a relationship? How could anybody like this?
Sure.
And
Or even your dream of just being
eventually-
shirtless on a beach, like something as simple as that.
yeah, eventually I started to realize that I wasn't incredibly happy about it. The regret came very, very soon afterward, but I couldn't really put a name to what that feeling was yet because I was so deep into it and I was just so fresh out of surgery.
Yeah.
But like because like of the quarantine and such, like I was spending a lot of time online, a lot of time on social media because like I can always like see my friends because of the measures, and then like not being able to be safe outside of the house without somebody like taking care of me. And like there were a lot of girls during this point in time who are like posting like photos, videos of themselves on their personal social media. So I had like a lot to compare myself to.
Right.
And I hadn't felt like that in the longest time because I was thinking like, well, I'm a guy, so like why would I care? But those feelings came back. They rushed back and it was like, I wish I was curvy. I wish I was pretty. I wish I was soft and feminine looking. But
Yeah.
I've been on hormones for years and I just lost my breasts. So how could I even think about that?
Yeah.
It was destroying me.
Sure.
But I couldn't even fathom like going back, or like just the fact that transition was not working.
Right.
Because it was like, well, I try to justify it in my head as like, I could just be an effeminate man. Because, you know, there's some boys who grow up to be very feminine, right? Maybe I'm non-binary. Maybe I'm just not good enough as a boy or a girl. Maybe I just shouldn't be either. Because how could I stop being transgender when I've already gone this far, you know?
Sure, exactly.
How could I go back to everybody in my life and tell them, this was wrong. I'm still a girl. I'm still Chloe. I didn't think that was possible. I thought that I would never look like or sound like or be a woman ever again.
Yeah.
But these feelings just got so much worse over time. And I had to face it eventually. And in my junior year of high school was when I was, for the first time, I was taking some classes in psychology. And the end of the course was focused mainly on like children, how they develop, how the way that they're raised shapes their development as people. And this is like the first time in my life that stuff about like family and children and raising them was something that was like on that I was focusing that was like a big focus for me. During my consultations for hormones and surgery and such, that was like that was briefly talked about. The potential like loss of my fertility, and the loss of my ability to breastfeed. But that was at a time when I still was very immature.
Sure.
I was still a kid, and I still was by this point. But I knew nothing about these things. I didn't value those things because I was still doing some growing up myself.
Of course.
How could I know anything about any of that? How could I make a decision around that? So that once I started learning about these things in such detail, it was like, wow, like this is so fascinating. And it was a big wake-up call.
Because you felt
that,
like those might be things you want
yeah,
for yourself.
I learned something about myself in those classes, that I wanted to become a mother, that I wanted to have children of my own, that I wanted to do it naturally, the way that I was made to. I wanted to get married, get pregnant, give birth, and I wish that I could breastfeed my children. But now, like, I wouldn't even have that option. That would never be an option for me because of this decision that I was enabled to make by irresponsible adults when I was still a child. And that crushed me.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to feel about that.
Oh, it's devastating.
I grieved. I was devastated for years. It's something that I made quite a bit of progress on, but it's something that still kind of kills me inside.
I'm sure.
And for months, that epiphany, I didn't know what to do with myself. There was like a several-week period when I just gave up on all my assignments. I just stayed in my bedroom all day. I couldn't function. And eventually, one night, I just broke down crying to my mom and a friend of mine about how much I regretted my transition, how much I could just dial back the clock and just grow up without any of these interventions. Just be allowed to be a woman.
How did your mom take that?
I mean, at that point in time, like I was so ashamed of myself. I couldn't even face her, and I didn't want my mom. I knew it was gonna hurt them. I knew it was gonna hurt my mom and dad just as much as it hurt me. I couldn't face them with tears and snot streaming down my face like that. I was so ashamed of myself. I didn't want to hurt them too, so I just texted her. And eventually she came to my door after a while, offered me some food and some words of comfort. But I knew, and I felt so guilty because she didn't know what to do about this either.
Yeah. Did you know at that point that detransitioning was an option?
I didn't. I mean, I was naturally starting to orient more towards femininity by this point in time. Like I'd been growing out my hair for probably about like a year. So it was like just above my jawline. We were wearing like some of my old girl clothes and like secretly buying some girls' clothing off the internet or like at Target or something. And it took me a few weeks to really process what was happening at that time. And eventually the word detransition just kind of popped into my head out of nowhere. It was like, you know, I went through a transition and then I stopped. So it was like 1 + 1 = 2, right? It's a detransition. And I was like, I wonder if that's like a real word. I wonder if that's a thing. So I Googled it and I found that there is an entire community online, like an entire like section on the Reddit website just dedicated to this, to to detransition, to transition regrets, to people's experiences of going through this. And I started making some friends in those communities. I started talking with other people who had experiences that were not too dissimilar from mine. And it was just incredible. It brought me a new understanding of every single part of this, from the transition to my feelings around it to the end of it. Yeah. And it was so interesting meeting other people. It just destroyed all the narratives. Yeah. And all these preconceptions that I had in my head around gender, around sex, which really are the same thing. But by that point in time, like when I talked on my personal social media about the regret and pain of transitioning in my detransition, I didn't anticipate this when I stopped transitioning. But they got angry. They got upset at me.
Who did?
I mean, a lot of these people were people from within the transgender community. Like people who I thought I loved, people who I thought loved me, were now turning their backs on me just because I stopped, because I wasn't like them anymore. People who were blaming me for what happened, telling me that I shouldn't be talking about it because I could be hurting other people, right? By talking about my own pain. And I mean, eventually I just stopped talking about it because the response was so cruel. So many people telling me that, like, well, this is all your fault. Only you can deal with this. Stop making other people, stop talking to other people about this.
And now they're saying you're the one who's causing people to kill themselves, basically. And I looked through your Twitter feed, Chloe, just before our interview, just to see what you've been up to, and it just keeps coming, even now. I mean, whoever Christians Are Groomers is on Twitter, it's like they say some of the most awful things to you and tell you to go to hell. You little C word.
Very interesting. He's got a cross with a
Ghostbusters line through it.
A cross being crossed out, telling me to go to hell.
You rightly pointed out the cruel irony of that, but on Twitter.
Yeah, and this was that was the kind of response that I've been receiving since the very end of my transition. Like frankly, it prepared me for what was to come once I started speaking out publicly. Yeah. And I when I talked with these other detransitioners and these other people who had regretted their transitions, all those narratives that I was harming the trans community or that I was rare, that I wasn't significant, completely destroyed. And most of these people who I was speaking to at the time, almost all of them actually, were all adults. They transitioned and detransitioned as adults. Okay. But I was different because I was a kid. Yes. And it pained me enough to know that these friends of mine went through what they did. But I knew that there had to be God knows how many other kids out there who've been through the very same thing. And I mean, I've always, how do I put this? I've always kind of been the person to put myself out there and not really care about what other people think. But not everybody is like that. Yeah. If I got the kind of response that I got from the transgender community, how are these other kids doing? I felt like I had this responsibility to get myself together. Yeah. And to start speaking up, however that looked like.
So what message do I want to bring to American teenagers and their families? I didn't need to be lied to. I needed compassion. I needed to be loved. I needed to be given therapy to help me work through my issues, not affirm to my delusion that by transforming into a boy, it would solve all my problems. We need to stop telling 12-year-olds that they were born wrong, that they are right to reject their own bodies and feel uncomfortable with their own skin. We need to stop telling children that puberty is an option, that they can choose what kind of puberty they will go through, just so they can choose what clothes to wear or what music to listen to. Puberty is a rite of passage to adulthood, not a disease to be mitigated. Today, I should be at home with my family celebrating my 19th birthday, and instead I'm making a desperate plea to my elected representatives. learned the lessons from other medical scandals like the opioid crisis, to recognize that doctors are human too, and sometimes they are wrong. My childhood was ruined along with thousands of detransitioners that I know through our networks. This needs to stop. You alone can stop it. Enough children have already been victimized by this barbaric pseudoscience. Please let me be your final warning.
You're a threat. Yeah, you're an inherent threat to something held dear by many people, and yet you felt, I would say, called by some higher being or force or something that just compelled you to speak up. And I don't know what your personal sort of faith perspective is at this point. I'm not imposing mine onto you, but you.
That's how I feel.
Yeah.
That's absolutely how I feel. I mean, when I stopped transitioning for about a year, maybe even years, I was still agnostic, not quite an atheist, because like once I started getting to my mid-teens, I started feeling as though there had to be some sort of higher power, because humanity is just so imperfect, and there's so many things that we just can't explain about the world around us.
Yeah.
There's just no way that we are the highest, most intelligent beings out there. And I mean, that was something that I didn't really consider myself religious at all until after I started speaking out, actually. There were a few times when, like during my transition and afterward, when it got just incredibly rough for me. Yeah. But I felt like I felt like I was being watched over and guided. And it was a feeling that I couldn't really explain for the longest time. But it wasn't until like I started connecting with other Christians, and I think like once I was invited out to speak at a church, when I stepped in, I finally understood what that feeling meant.
It became personal for you. The connection to this higher being.
Absolutely. And I think that even just that feeling of being called to speak out about this was exactly that. And I don't think that I could have gotten through everything that I have without that. I just don't think it would have been humanly possible.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think it's possible to speak the truth to a hostile world without that personal understanding of God and knowing that there's more going on than the day-to-day. Like the resistance you face, Chloe, and you're so young again, and you remind me of my daughter, actually, which is why I get emotional a little, but the resistance from powerful forces in this world. Even the New York Times wrote an article saying basically, you're just one of a few people like you that are making it difficult for the masses of, transitioners, that trans people that need this to live and not kill themselves. And you're really problematic and in the worst way imaginable. And your poise in refuting that and standing up still is near divine. And so
thank you.
I just encourage you to keep going in that, and you carry yourself with grace, and you're never hateful toward people who disagree with you. And I encourage you to keep that up as well, because that's what gives you your mandate. Really, that's why people listen. You're not nasty. You're telling your story.
I try not to be.
Yeah. I know it's hard, because the people, you should be nasty at times to the people that are in positions of power that are imposing this ideology on to children especially. And I know that's what you're spending a lot of your time doing now, speaking out against that. Tell us, people that might not be familiar with you at all, what kinds of work are you up to these days on that front?
Yeah, so since I was 17, this has been pretty much the entire focus of my life. I never really thought that it would get anywhere near as big as it is now. But I started speaking out on my platform of choice was Twitter, which now is called X.
Right.
But it blew up pretty quickly. A lot of people took a lot of interest in my story. Eventually, like within like a few months of having this account up and just talking about my detransition, there were journalists reaching out to me. Started getting some media attention, and then eventually, I was invited out by a parent group to testify on a bill that was favoring the transition of children. And eventually I started doing that more and more, and it basically became routine for me to speak on these bills for the protection of children.
Yeah.
And since then, like I've spoken in quite a few legislatures around the states, and I've spoken personally to communities, churches, community events, schools, youth groups, colleges, to spread my message. I mean, I have a lot of fun while I'm doing it. It's something that I really enjoy doing, because it's something that's brought a lot of meaning and change and growth into my life. I'm connecting with a lot of people who, I mean, it's just so beautiful to me because these are people who I share my values with, people who I'm fighting on a common goal with.
Yeah.
And many of these people are mothers, fathers, other detransitioners, other people who have desisted, other people who have been affected by this. And I love them to death. And I don't always have a whole lot of time at home or free time, but when I do, I like illustrating. I like listening to music. I rollerblade a little bit, and I like spending time with my family and my friends at home.
Nice. Do you still hope to be a mother one day?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't know when that's going to come, but
yeah,
it's something that I'm really looking forward to. I really want to have a family of my own one day.
You will
and it's something that I do worry about. I worry about like how good of a mother I'll be, how much this will affect like my ability to conceive or anything. But I have a lot of hope about the future, not only my own future, but the future of all the kids, the families, the institutions that are being affected by this.
Yeah.
I think that we will win.
In one way or another, you're going to be a fantastic mom one day. And I can't wait to see that part of your story unfold in due time, in due season. Do you have a final word of warning or advice to parents that are in the position your parents were in back in the 20 teens when you were younger?
I think to any parent, even those of you who don't have children that are currently struggling with this, I think that you have a responsibility to talk to them about these issues, because they're going to learn about it some way or another. They're going to be exposed to it either by the media they watch and interact with, whatever games they play. At school, whether it be from a teacher, another adult, or through the curriculum, or through their friend groups. And you have a responsibility to get to them before outside influences do, to talk to them about the truth of this, that boys can only be boys, that girls can only be girls, and that's okay, and that's a beautiful thing. And that there is nothing wrong with them, that they are perfect, that they are beautiful the way that they were born. But that we should also have compassion for those boys and girls who may struggle with this.
Of course.
But that the compassionate thing to do isn't to just give them what they want, but rather what they may need, giving them that support. And I think that if your child is struggling with this, that is exactly what you should do. You should be reinforcing their identity by teaching them that it comes from what they do, not from the way that they dress, not from what their hair looks like, what their face looks like. It's what they do. It comes from their skills, and the work that they do for their family, for their community.
That's awesome. Chloe Cole, thank you so much for spending all this time with us today. You are a delight, beautiful inside and out, and I just pray you keep going. So,
I will.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Thank you.